Yeah, so I've been intending to do a what is family constellation video, and there's a lot of them out there, and a lot of them talk about what the actual process is. And I feel like there's a lot of those already. And oftentimes, when people ask me about family constellations, I simply share with them what the benefits are. The family constellation process, if you haven't seen it yet, you should go and see it and experience it for yourself, because some of it is really indescribable, what the magic that you receive from either standing in or simply observing a family constellation. So what some of the benefits are is expanding your awareness of systemic dynamics. And a lot of times, so what the difference is between something that isn't a systemic dynamic is kind of how we think about it. I think you were saying this before. You're like, well, I have a pretty good relationship with my family. When I think about my ancestry, it's pretty good. My dad and I get along, so I don't really need that modality. And that's as far as we think. But there's so much more than just you, and it's not as much about, or it can be very much about your relationship with your mom, your relationship with your dad. That's extremely important, and that's a good place to start. But some of the questions you might ask is, what is the relationship that my mom and my dad had? What is the relationship that my grandma and grandpas had with each other? What is some of the traumas that existed? And one of the studies that was done was the cherry blossom study in 2013. And some of these studies are just the science catching up with what the shamans and the mystics have known for thousands of years, is basically how we carry consciousness in our field. And so with the cherry blossom study was done with mice. And what they would do, and I'm sorry, the mice get the short end of the stick on some of these studies, but so what they would do is they'd shock the floor of this mouse in a cage. It couldn't go anywhere, it had to get shocked. But at the same time, it would introduce the smell of cherry blossoms. And so, of course, it had a Pavlovian response. Does Pavlov ring a bell for everybody? I mean, Pavlovian response is where you have the stimulus and the response. He would just ring a bell at the same time he would feed the dogs, and then all he would have to do is ring the bell, and they would salivate. So that, it's a stimulus and response thing. So the mice would have a Pavlovian response, which is no surprise, a fear response with elevated RNAs, a fear response to the smell of cherry blossoms. So they wouldn't need to shock the floor anymore. They would just introduce the smell of cherry blossoms, and they would measure that in the software of the DNA. But the fascinating part is that they would measure that in the offspring of the mice. And they measured it 3 generations down, the same Pavlovian response to the trauma of the floor getting shocked. And so what it showed, and what a lot of the scientists will say, is that it shows that trauma is carried transgenerationally. But I feel that it's more than that. It's also showing that we're programming our very DNA in every moment, with our consciousness, with how we feel, with what we choose to vibrate to, with what we choose to believe, with how we navigate and heal, change patterns or not change patterns. We're either allowing our DNA to stay the same or program it. And what it's also showing is that it helps me in this idea of what I like to share with folks as beginning place with understanding how valuable family constellations are, is the difference between what is conscious and what is unconscious. So what is unconscious? A lot of times people have a hard time answering that question. Of course, like, what did you forget? Tell me all the things that you have forgotten. I'm waiting. And then so once you've remembered what those things you've forgotten are, they're no longer forgotten. Now they're remembered. Now they're conscious. So a good way to think about conscious and unconscious is what has been forgotten and what has been remembered. And so if you have a trauma in this lifetime and you almost fell off a cliff and now you're afraid of heights, you know why. Because you had that trauma, and that traumatic event is now causing anxiety around the cliffs, for example, which is probably healthy. But anyway, there's so many traumas that we carry that are unconscious because it's something our grandparents experienced or our great-grandparents experienced. And then it's not just the trauma, it's what's the result. What's the decision that was made? Oh, I'm never going to be around heights again. Or having a lot of money and I lost it, or it caused this problem and now I'll never have a lot of money again. Or, all of these, or my heart was so severely broken that I'll never truly open it again. And we've all had that experience of having that in this lifetime, of our response or decisions that we've made in response to trauma. But some of those are actually a wave of energy that we've carried from further back. And we're experiencing just the ripple of a larger tidal wave of some of that trauma. And the trauma is showing up because it's because we're already resonating to that frequency. It's kind of like the law of attraction. Law of attraction is, that which is likened to itself is drawn. So, when we're having a good day, we're having more of a good day. We're having a bad day, we're having more of a bad day, and it just rolls like that. So, law of attraction works the other way too, where if sometimes the word is karma. And so, if there's this negative energy around a particular thing, then that's what will show up. And so oftentimes the trauma that we experience are a vibrational manifestation of the energy that we've carried with us. So we'll be like, why does this pattern keep showing up? Why does this pattern keep showing up in my relationships? Why does this pattern keep showing up with in relation to money, or my ceiling on how much money I can allow myself to have? And a lot of times, or pretty much that's where the answer lies, is what the unconscious patterns that exist, which has everything to do with the patterns that exist in your family system. So family constellations is basically the key to unlocking whatever the deepest pattern in your life is, and opening up for you to have more freedom to create something else instead of just living out that pattern that you've been doing your whole life. Basically, one of the things I call family constellations is soul yoga. It's a practice. A lot of times people think about it as one and done, like, oh, I'm going to go receive a constellation and then I'll, shift this pattern, which is great. Yeah, I think you should do that. And I call it soul yoga because it's a practice. And one of the benefits I feel is just enormous, is becoming aware of what some of those systemic dynamics are. When we do that, that helps us navigate life and relationships as it happens. It helps us to navigate those energies with our relationship to money. Everything in the universe is in relationship with everything else. So our relationship to money, our relationship to intimate relationship, our relationship to our health, our relationship to our well-being, our emotional well-being. And so we all have these patterns that are there. And so what family constellations are is this opportunity to shift whatever the deepest pattern in your life is. And it's also this opportunity to have an expanded awareness, so that's so those patterns are no longer in the shadow. So the more you build your awareness and the more you do the soul yoga of building these awarenesses, the more capacity that you have to, or a good way to describe it is, what is in the shadows stays in the shadows and stays unchanged. What you bring into the light of your conscious awareness, which is what happens when you participate in family constellations, then it brings those patterns into the light of awareness, and thereby gives you the opportunity to bring your conscious intention to shifting those patterns. So I can't recommend enough for folks to make it part of their life, to explore family constellations. Yeah.